go. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the MT4MH Studios, where we spread our love and we share our ketogenic lifestyles. Today, I have the pleasure of introducing Shannon Harwood, someone who not only transformed her own life through metabolic therapies, but also inspired many others by doing so with heart, humor, and fierce determination. You may know Shannon as the winner of the Fresh Start Award, but titles aside, what makes her story so powerful is her honesty, resilience, and deep desire to help others find their way back to themselves. Today, we're diving deep into Shannon's story, from her childhood and early signs her brain was off, to her quest for calm and happiness, finding food freedom, navigating medication tapering, and dealing with cholesterol questions along the way. Whether you're just getting started on keto or deep into your healing journey, this episode will speak to you. So let's light that fire and get into it. Shannon, how are you today?
I'm very well. Stephen, thank you so much for asking me to come along. I love talking about this stuff. So thanks for allowing this conversation to take place. That's great.
You're welcome, and thank you for being here. You were a guest on Meetup recently with Mia, and it's so amazing listening to you. I listened to your interview with Casey Ruff the other day, and you said that you could just talk for ages about metabolic psychiatry. And I could too, but I feel specifically about you that I could just listen to you talk about metabolic psychiatry for ages. I just love it. I just love everything you have to say.
Oh, I'm blushing. I'm not sure that comes under my office lights, but I am. Thank you, Stephen.
You're welcome. So you're in Tasmania, right? Australia?
I am. I'm at the bottom of the world. A lot of metabolic psychiatry happens in the USA, but it's also happening down here. We've got a very active low carb down under network, not necessarily for mental illness and psychiatry, but lots of low carb keto practitioners down here in Australia as well, and connections being formed there. Yeah.
Yeah, that's amazing. So for people that don't know, when you're on the other side of the world like that, you're 15 hours ahead. So here it is Thursday evening, but it's Friday morning there, and your seasons are different too. So your summer's wrapping up now. Is that right?
Our autumn's actually feels like it's our summer is wrapping up, yes, and we're exactly doing that. We're in autumn now, yeah.
You're in autumn now. So how's the weather where you are?
Uh, we're having a little bit of a swan song actually. Winter came early last week, but we're back into beautiful long autumn days today, so that's nice. And so when I came in for this interview this morning, I'm still watching daylight break as you're finishing off your evening, which
Right.
sometimes feels a bit strange, but daylight has risen while we're talking. Yeah.
Yeah. I find it so interesting because your summer's just wrapping up and ours is right around the corner. We've had some warmer days here. We've had some days like in the 70s that were really nice. This week it's been cold. I have the fireplace on again, but the daffodils have bloomed, the trees are all coming in, and summer is right around the corner. And for you, it's fading away.
Yeah, my daffodils are just popping their heads up above the soil.
All right, so let's get right into it. Like I do with all my guests, I want to know about your childhood, what kind of kid you were, and what your diet was like growing up.
Oh, I was an amazing child. I mean, my parents were so lucky to have me. No, I mean, I was, I just give it a little background because I know that, we're here talking in the mental health space, and we hear mental health professionals talk about adverse child events and trauma in your background. But, the cause of mental illness, and I'll stay at the start of this for anybody who's not seen me. I've lived with a diagnosis of bipolar 2 disorder for quite some time, but the cause of mental illness is not completely known. So I'm just going to reference that up in my childhood when I say that my childhood was really rather ordinary. My two parents, who are still both alive, still married, and still very much in love. I have three sisters. We have nothing interesting or exciting. We didn't have wealth growing up, but neither did we have poverty. All our basic needs were met. In terms of so I have no background of emotional, physical, psychological, or sexual abuse or trauma or anything like that. Really, really ordinary stuff. I think still going, from adolescence into adulthood and still through adulthood, every family has family dynamics, so does mine. And have there been learnings and difficulties and things along the way? Of course there have been. But I just want to reference that up in frame of, sort of a trauma-informed look at that, because I think it's important to note that not everybody who experiences serious mental illness, for me, when I look at causation for illness, I'm sort of going, well, I don't think it could be that, because there was nothing there to look at. So in some ways, I think I just wanted to put that out there. And I'll say in terms of, food, because this is quite a bit what this interview is going to be about. So when I say that we weren't wealthy, but we weren't poor, my father comes from a farming background, and my father and mother grew vegetables, fruit. We had fruit trees, nut trees, large vegetable beds, lots of fruit and vegetables coming out of our garden, and we did that, my mum tells me, that so that she could augment the family table. This wasn't It wasn't just a love of gardening. My father now grows ornamentals and not veggies. This was part of practical feeding of a family of 6. So that sort of might set the scene there. Is that
Yeah, that was perfect. So you were one of 6 siblings?
No, 4 siblings.
Oh, 4. Oh, so 6 total in the family. I was one of 4 as well. So what number sibling were you?
I have 2 older sisters, and I'm one of twin girls at the end.
Ah, I didn't know you were a twin. That's interesting. I have 2 older brothers as well, but I also have a younger brother. Interesting. I'm glad you said the part about the trauma because it's highly associated with mental illness. And some people like me, I inherited some of the genes from people in my family, but I also had trauma, and then I also had drug abuse. So I've got like basically everything that contributes to it possible, but not everyone has that, like you said. It's interesting. It just goes to show you that it's not always somebody suffers a trauma as a child and all of a sudden their brain is messed up. Your brain can be messed up just because you were born that way and it doesn't process energy correctly.
Yeah, or my brain could be perfectly fine for human beings until I introduced it to a diet that messed my brain energy up. I'm not sure. I look at this sometimes and I think, if I'd been born 11,000 years ago, I probably wouldn't have bipolar. you know, um, so I'm not sure that it's anything fundamentally wrong with my brain. I'm more of the opinion these days that, um, I have unsickened my brain. Not so much that I've healed my brain, but I just don't sicken it anymore with foods. But, this is a changing thought space for me. I haven't, yeah.
That's very, very interesting for you to put it that way. I've always thought of myself, well, when I got the bipolar diagnosis 20 years ago, I thought, okay, I'm bipolar. But then as I've learned over the last couple of years, and from people like in Metabolic Mind, and then talking to people like Hannah Warren, and they'll say that it's metabolic brain dysfunction or neurometabolic dysfunction. So your brain is not processing energy correctly. I still always thought of it as a defect, but I guess if we're not so much eating a species appropriate diet, then how could you expect any part of your body really to function? It's a great way of looking at it.
Yeah, as I say, this is changing thoughtscape for me. It's really interesting what you just said there about bipolar, how you used to think of that, because I sort of think, if you've got a diagnostic label in your life, like I've had bipolar too, my thoughts on that have changed over time, like yours as well. So when I was first diagnosed with bipolar, um, there was a sense of relief almost because I had a late diagnosis. So there's almost a sense of relief. And then I, got into looking at those brain imaging scans and I went, oh yeah, this is absolutely out of my control. This is just coming from outside. And I can understand why a sense of fatedness and hopelessness. So it was reassuring. It was sort of like, oh, well, this is not my fault. And then but it was also, oh, but there's nothing I can do about this. This is a state of being. My brain is broken. And I've worked as a peer worker with people a lot, and that idea that your brain is broken is that whatever hand you were dealt, there's no doubt to me that you can change things. What things they are, how much change you will have, how that will work for you, I have no idea. But I know that if today you don't eat, I don't know, what's something terrible that you could eat? Well, I mean, even
Cookies?
just silly things. Yeah, today if you don't eat sugar and tomorrow you eat nothing but sugar, you will change your destiny, and you will change your biology and you will change your epigenetics and you'll probably change your neuroplasticity. If I get up tomorrow and I absolutely think nothing but negative thoughts for the rest of my life, there is no doubt that my neuroplasticity and my brain will reflect that. So
Yeah, I love that. And so it sounds like your experience with your diagnosis was exactly like mine. I had a sigh of relief, but mine lasted probably about 30 seconds because the next couple lines out of the doctor's mouths, well, you have a lifelong condition and you're going to have to take medicine for the rest of your life. When I heard that I was bipolar, I thought, well, this is amazing. I was in my mid 20s and I had been suffering greatly for a long time. And I thought, okay, finally, I have a reason, I have an explanation. It wasn't so much that, hey, it's not my fault, but it was like, okay, good, let's fix it. Here's what it is, let's fix it. But there is no fix. The fix is, well, it's going to be a cocktail of medicines. And I already had my experience with cocktails of medicines and being on two or three at a time and not getting to a place where I wanted to live like that. I knew if that was my destiny, I felt so hopeless. It was like my brain lit up for a second, like, yes, this is it. And then I was crushed 30 seconds later when I realized that there really was no fix for it.
if we talked about nothing else in this interview except what you just said in those last three sentences, we could fill a from that point. I too was so I my bipolar began for me at about the age of 15, but I didn't get diagnosed till 40. So that's a long messy gap. We can probably backtrack a little if we fancy it later. But at that point of diagnosis, and over the first couple of years working with mental health professionals, I was told I had a chronic condition, a lifelong condition, condition that would require medication for the rest of my life. I was told that it was likely that my parenting would be interrupted, that it was unlikely that I'd ever hold down full time work. Strangely enough, I wasn't told that there's a statistical life expectancy gap with people with a serious mental illness of between 16 to 23 years. I wasn't told that. I found out that on my own, sitting in a room with my children nearby. I mean, what a thing to find out on your own. And like you, Stephen, that sense of, because I'd failed at a lot of things in my life, and the sense that when I got diagnosed that failure might have some causes. So I had two things, as you say, that the sort of relief and then the messaging, that the terribly negative messaging. And so I did what you did. I went, okay, all right, well, okay, if I've got bipolar, then I'm going to find out everything I possibly can about bipolar. And then I'm going to do every single thing that I can possibly do to improve my circumstances with bipolar. I had no thought that complete cure or remission was possible at that stage. But one of the first things I did find out when looking at bipolar was the idea that bipolar is caused by genetics or is caused by a chemical imbalance in the brain. They're theories, just that. They're theories, you know. And so, yeah, then I went on a learning curve.
Yeah, it sounds like, man, it sounds like the messaging you got was a lot worse than what I got. I can't imagine some of the negative things they were telling you. Like the state I was in at the time when I got diagnosed, I already wanted to unalive myself. That's why I was brought to the hospital by my sponsor, because every day for weeks I wanted to unalive myself. If they had told me all those terrible things, I may have just gone off myself right then and there. It's
Oh,
terrible.
this was messaging that came over a course of years. It
Okay.
wasn't like someone sat me down and said all that
Okay.
at the point of diagnosis. That
Okay.
didn't happen. This was messaging that I picked up from medical health professionals over the years. But, when you talk about the things that happen when you get diagnosed with bipolar, and I'm going to go rogue a bit here in this interview because I just do want to say one of the things that happens when you get or when I can't say I'll say one of the things that often happens and happens to me when I was diagnosed with bipolar medication is in the same consultation that I was diagnosed with bipolar medication, I was prescribed my first medication. And my first medication led to my second medication. And my second medication led to my third medication. And on it went. And actually it went to 17 medications. And what was interesting to me about that, looking back now I actually don't need to use medication, but looking back now was that cascade of polypharmacy as things were added into my medication regime that didn't seem to be working. They weren't always taken away. So I ended up on, quite a bit of medication. And I think sometimes just to say it and to say it out loud sort of gives, because every one of these medications may come with side effects or it may not. Some of mine did. So I've just, I'm just going to say it out loud, this list of medications, because sometimes clinicians listen to these interviews as well. And if you're wondering whether I'm some sort of anti medication fanatic, no, I'm not. I absolutely took these medications in the way that they were prescribed carefully. And I believe that they are powerful tools for symptom management for some people, some of the time. Cariprazine, lamotrigine, sodium valproate, quetiapine, acenapine, olanzapine, risperidone, what were the antidepressants? They were fluoxetine and sertraline, diazepam, temazepam, clomazepam. There's another one there, alprazolam. Then we had, what else is, ketamine, propranolol, colpidem. I haven't got to 17, so I haven't got enough. But that cocktail of 4 or 5 meds at each time, I just want to say that too. So, and I want to say it because I was told that that's what bipolar management essentially was. Sure, I could eat a healthy diet or get some sleep. I was told that was useful, try and limit stress. But it seemed to be the model of care that I was faced with was that it was considered that the heavy lifters in that management would be the medication. And it's interesting to me that as it's turned out, those heavy lifters didn't lift much of the burden for me because I didn't respond to those medications particularly well. For example, SSRIs simply did not relieve any symptom of depression that I ever had in my life, although I suffered from depression terribly. Some did some things, some did nothing. And that's different for all of us. Some people will respond to one, some people will respond to another. Purely the reason I do that is because I do not want to be earmarked as someone who's anti-medication. I am not anti-medication. Even in my journey getting into ketogenic therapy, I used medication. I actually increased my medication at the start of my keto journey, which is interesting. So I want to get that messaging out there clearly. And I also want to add something. I guess now I've gone completely rogue. I'll just add something to that. If you happen to be a clinician listening to this, or you're somebody who's starting this journey of a ketogenic journey, I'll say this: the beautiful thing about keto is you can use it as an adjunct therapy. You don't have to throw your medication out the window. You don't have to, if you're a clinician, you don't have to throw your clinical guidelines out the window. You can keep doing exactly what you're doing and take ketogenic diet into your life. And then if you have a drop in symptoms, if you're no longer so ill and you're working with a careful and thoughtful practitioner who's wondering what your lowest effective dose is, then you may be at a point where you were able to start lowering those medications simply because you don't need them anymore. not based on ideology, not based on that medications are bad, but you simply might be able to lower those medications simply because you don't actually require them anymore. So I'm not anti-medication, and I'm not saying this will work for everybody, and people can buy medications and keto, and some people are just keto, and some people are just medications, all sorts of people in this world. But there's absolutely no reason why you can't begin a ketogenic diet as an adjunct therapy for what you're already doing.
That's a great message for everyone. So first of all, you can't go rogue on my show. Okay, we're here to talk, um, and and I want to hear you talk no matter what you have to say, and you can say whatever you want. Okay, there is no going rogue here. um,
You might regret that, Stephen.
let's see if you can prove me wrong. um, that's quite an impressive list of medications. I know some of those by their clinical names, but I'm more familiar with the names like Remron, Wellbutrin, Lamictal. Those are all the medicines that I was taking. And
I missed that one. Lamotrigine, Lamictal. Yeah,
you did say that.
took
That
that
was
too.
one of the first ones you said. Yeah. Yeah. So when I got my bipolar diagnosis, I already had, I don't know, maybe 8 to 10 years of taking medications. And they started me on the SSRIs and they were terrible for me. They were horrible. They made me feel awful. Lots of side effects. And, I'm a young in my 20s and I've got sexual dysfunction and I can't sleep and they were awful. And then Wellbutrin and Effexor, like, kind of like were somewhat okay for me. If I was ever in an emergent situation where I wanted to really unalive myself, I could take a Wellbutrin or an Effexor and I might get out of that situation. And then for a couple of weeks, I feel okay to where I can start to function again. But then the side effects start to pile up. And when I got my bipolar diagnosis was when they added Lamictal for the first time, as they called it a mood stabilizer. And I didn't know at the time that it was an anti-seizure med. I wish that I had known that 20 years ago when I started taking it, because I had been self-medicating with marijuana for the longest time. It was the only thing that ever provided relief. And I didn't even realize at the time that they used that to treat seizures as well. And it just turns out that the particular strains of marijuana that are most effective for seizures are the ones that I like the best, the ones that work the best for me. And then you add in the Lamictal, and then years ago when I discovered ketosis by accident, and then I found Chris Palmer and I found that they're using the ketogenic diet for epilepsy, it was this huge light bulb moment. Those are the only things that have ever worked for me. Now, I've never had a seizure. I've never been diagnosed as epileptic, but I did find out recently that my grandfather was epileptic. He did have full on seizures, and he also had an anger streak and would break things at times, just like me. So I find that very interesting.
And it is interesting. The epilepsy, the people talk about epilepsy in this space, and there's a crossover too between epilepsy and autism. So my journey was different but the same. I was traveling along lots of complicated things that I was doing, but I'd taken control of. I was limiting that cascade of polypharmacy myself because it obviously wasn't working. I was still just having as many bipolar episodes as ever. I no longer believed that medications were going to solve all my problems. So I thought, well, I can at least get rid of the ones that obviously aren't working. And for me, lamotrigine was one of those meds, but I couldn't get off it. I had the most terrible withdrawal discontinuation. It took years for me to get Lamictal out of my life, and that's not common, but again, each person is a person. So because I'm grateful for it now because, what I did was I started researching Lamictal because I wanted to know how this drug worked in my brain because I was wanted to get off it and I couldn't. And while I was researching it, that's when I discovered that Lamictal was an epilepsy drug. That's when I discovered lots of drugs used in bipolar, lots of medications used in bipolar or epilepsy. Well, not lots, but quite a few started as off-label epilepsy drugs. So your sodium valproates, your lamotrigines, even the benzodiazepams. And as I was reading about epilepsy, because I'm kind of curious, and I probably just went too far down the rabbit hole because I like rabbit holes, I came across this article that said that when these medications don't work for epilepsy, they use a ketogenic diet. And I just went like you, Stephen, light bulb moment. I just went, what? What? But epilepsy's got like seizures. I mean, epilepsy's like serious. I mean, I might just have emotional problems that are causing my bipolar, but epilepsy's serious medical condition, you know. And then I turned around from that article and I jumped on the internet and I heard the story of some guy in Sweden, I think it was. I'd love to know who he was. It was really early on, and he had schizophrenia and he wanted to lose some weight, and he'd taken up a keto diet and had reported on the effects of that for his mental illness. And then I just became hooked, and I read, and I came across Ian Campbell, and I read and I read and I read. And to me, and this is sometimes how I try and reach people with this, that it's not like you just get healthier and things improve. There's something real going on here. If we're talking about ketogenic dietary interventions, if we're talking about an intervention that can stop a seizure, and again, I don't believe that ketogenic diets work for everybody with epilepsy, but they are capable of stopping a seizure, you know, of stopping people or having that journey with epilepsy. I don't think if you just ate a keto diet on Tuesday lunchtime, the seizures that you're having in the Tuesday, you know, it's not quite that. But I'm sure you guys get what I'm saying. If it is powerful enough to do that in seizure and epilepsy, then I myself am infuriated at people who take the attitude to me and they go, as if, oh yeah, as if a ketogenic diet can really do that. Sure, you know. Um, and it's not always spoken. It's a little bit more subtle than that sometimes. But the lack of curiosity in medical professionals, the evidence is what it is. We don't have 200 years of evidence for ketogenic diet in mental illness. That is true. But we won't get 200 years of evidence about ketogenic diets in mental illness unless we actually do the research. And we won't do the research, except obviously Metabolic Mind, Bazooki Foundation have been just fabulous in funding some of this in this sector, but in other places it's happening too. But unless people become curious, unless people go, case studies, individual case studies are not some lower, unimportant form of evidence. These are real human beings who have really had these changes in their life, and there are genuine reasons why these have happened. So, clinicians working hands on with people will understand that perhaps more, I don't know, more than a researcher looking at high level studies. If you're a clinician and someone comes into your practice and something happens to them, or you try something in your own life and it happens to you, you tend to believe it because you've just seen it. So I think that case studies and things are definitely have their place and valuable. So if I take my living case study, I don't ask you to believe. I don't pretend that all the research that could be done has already been done, but I think it would be respectful to be curious because I had 35 years of unremitting bipolar disorder. I went through medications, hospitalizations, TMS. There was no doubt about my diagnosis. It was confirmed by multiple doctors. And I sit here today and I say, I do not have bipolar disorder anymore. I do not live with bipolar. I do not spend any time managing bipolar symptoms. No time, no energy managing bipolar at all because I have no bipolar to manage. I'd be curious.
That's incredible. I first want to say that I'm just happy for you because I've heard your story and I know what your bipolar was like and the cycles you went. Your bipolar was way different than mine, but I'm just really happy that you found this and you've gotten to a point where you can say that you don't have to manage bipolar anymore. You don't even have it. Why don't you give us a quick rundown on what your bipolar was like and then I'll explain mine.
Yeah, because that's really worthwhile, isn't it? Because I've just said that I don't manage bipolar symptoms anymore. So yeah, there has been a before and after. And again, that's been a process. There's been other things that I've done in life to manage bipolar apart from a ketogenic diet. But I'll tell you what my bipolar's like, and I'd love to hear what yours is. And that in itself is interesting because bipolar disorder does not appear in the same way in everybody's life. And one of the things about bipolar management that was very useful to me as I went along my journey before ketogenic therapy was to learn what my bipolar pattern was even as someone experiencing it, to really be able to analyze what was happening, what were my triggers, what were my early warning signs. So my bipolar pattern looks something like this. And this began for me at 15, the first early symptoms. By just on 18, I had the first major episode. And what essentially happens to me is that I spend a period of time hypomanic, and then after hypomania comes a period of depression. Depending what my management strategies were like for dealing with those two states, that could take anywhere from maybe 6 weeks to 3 months, 6 months for an episode. I would still be managing residual things between episodes, um, and that would happen every 18 months, 2 years. Yeah. Perhaps it might be useful, though, for people to understand, if you'd like me to do this, Stephen, to just explain what hypomania felt like for me or what depression felt like for me. Is that useful?
Absolutely. I was already thinking that. I was going to ask that next. Yep.
Because I understand that people coming to your podcast are coming for all sorts of reasons, and there's no reason why any of them would have bipolar 2 disorder. So in bipolar 2, if you have bipolar 2 diagnosis, you don't experience mania, which may come with like bipolar 1. They call it hypomania, which is sort of one level down from mania. So, hallucinations, full persecutory delusions, they weren't, psychosis wasn't part of my journey. And hypomania can be missed, and it does a lot of damage. So hypomania for me felt like an unrelenting drive and an upswing in energy. I didn't need to sleep. I didn't need to eat. Sometimes I felt amazing and elated and glorious and strong and confident and full of ideas. And I would start 15 projects. I might not finish any of them, and you might think that that doesn't sound too bad, but also my impulsivity and recklessness and my ability to judge risks went off, and my judgment went off. I would get tunnel vision on a project that had caught my interest, and I would follow that to the detriment of everything else that happened in my life. And of course, sometimes the other things that were happening in my life were my children. So as a parent, I was inattentive because I was off madly perfecting panna cotta recipes and making hundreds and hundreds of panna cottas out of my kitchen. My children were still there. Um, and for me, the hardest thing I think about hypomania was one of the hardest things about it was the actual loss of judgment. I was not making good judgments. And it upset relationships, it upset friendships, it upset romantic relationships. I would quit jobs for no reason because I would decide, just for no reason, really. And then it would end. And the depression would come. And unfortunately, if I'd done things while I was hypomanic, like ended a relationship or ended a job, they're just the obvious examples to grab at, but there are lots and lots of things. Then I'd have regrets about that, and I'd be sad about the damage that I'd done. So not only was I looking back now, not only was I dealing with the physical bipolar depression, but I was also dealing with genuine human sadness and regret and a sense of failure, and my judgment was come back, and even I couldn't quite work out why I'd done some of the things I'd done. And I just thought that I was a messed up human being, and I was sad about that. And anyone who doesn't know about bipolar depression, it is like turning off the power switch off at a power point. It's like no longer powered to move, to move your arms and legs, to get off a bed. It's the sense of isolation. And if in hypermania you feel connected to the universe, in depression, I felt unconnected from everything. Someone asked me about this recently, and I explained it. I said, "Oh, it's like a cosmic grief." And then I thought, "Well, what do I mean by that?" And I thought, if it ever comes up, I'll say it again. So I've thought about that. When you lose someone that you love, you you grieve that loss. You grieve that loss, that lack of presence. And I think people can really relate to what that sense of intense grief feels like. For me, in bipolar disorder, it wasn't that, because you can no longer connect to that person. It's that connection, that living connection that you've lost with that person. With bipolar depression, for me, it felt like I'd lost that living connection, not just with one person. It felt like I'd lost that living connection with everything. And there was a terrible sense of grief about that. And I used to call it like a cosmic grief. And I would manage kids, lunchbox runs. When I could get off the couch, I did get off the couch. I would try my very best to keep some sort of daily life together. And if I managed really well and I managed to get through a day, and I'd go to bed at night, sometimes my own weeping would wake me up in the middle of the night. And I didn't even know that I held it in all so tightly during the day sometimes, just so I could manage. If you can manage that, and I don't mean crying. I mean the thing that wakes you up is full scale weeping. What's my subconscious doing there, Stephen?
Oh man, I'm almost in tears listening to you because as different as our bipolar episodes were, it's all the same stuff. So I was bipolar 2 mixed was my diagnosis. I was a rapid cycler. So I didn't have months at a time really. What I had was every day I had depression and I had hypomania. I would typically be depressed in the morning and hypomanic at night. That's when those two would be more distinct. But I had both of those really at all times. And I would wake up in the morning feeling so terrible. And the way I would describe it to people is like this cosmic grief you're saying. I would say, I feel like somebody just called me and told me that my mom died, but I have no reason to feel that way. And along with that was always anger and irritability, which I still suffer from today. No matter what I do, I don't, it's not connected to whatever bipolar was there. All it has to be is a cold in the house, I'm a little bit sick, or I'm tired, or a bad day, and I can get irritable and angry still. So we're going to talk about happy and calm after this because that's the opposite of how I always felt. But I would wake up in the morning terribly depressed, like my mom just died, and not understanding why I felt that way. And there was always drug use because I was using marijuana to give me some relief from how I was feeling, and always feelings of wanting to unalive myself. And then as the day would go on, I would typically get more hypomanic at night and I would feel great at night. And then I wouldn't want to go to bed because I felt so good because I knew as soon as I went to bed, I'd wake up and feel terrible again the next day. And the lack of judgment that you talk about, it wasn't like months at a time I had it and then I went depressed and I had my judgment back. It was a constant thing for me. And that's why I have tattoos. There were times where I was so angry that I said, well, F it. I'm just going to go get a tattoo because that'll make me feel better. And not realizing or even caring that it's going to be on my skin for the rest of my life. I didn't care. Or if I did, like if I knew, I didn't even know what I was doing, but if I just didn't care, I was like, I don't care. I need relief. And I would do that with all types of things, not just spending money, all the things that you would do when you're a teenager, but when you have poor judgment or lack of judgment, and the drug use. And I would find myself hanging out with people that use drugs because I wanted to get my marijuana, and then all the drugs that come along with it. And I would do drugs that I didn't even like. I didn't even like how I felt. Like I would do cocaine, and cocaine had the opposite effect on me. I would, instead of being like talkative and happy, I'd want to go hide in a corner somewhere. But I would do it anyway because I had no judgment. I was just doing whatever was in front of me. And part of the medications that you listed were the benzos. I never took benzos because of the addiction history. There's no way that I could regulate a benzo. I would end up crushing and snorting them and whatever. I just couldn't do it. So that's what it was like for me. Now I would have months at a time where I would be more depressed, and then maybe months at a time where I would be more hypomanic, but I still had that rapid cycling throughout every day where it was just depressed and hypo at the same time. That's what I dealt with.
I experienced rapid cycling once for 14 months off the back of antidepressant use. And rapid cycling was one of the effects of that for me. And I went through 14 months of it. So just a big, can you do one of those heart, like those heart things? But best a big, because there will be people listening to that is its own particular form of bipolar hell. There is no, I only did it for 14 months on one occasion and some time else. I did have mixed states in between going from high to low, but that extended mixed state or rapid cycling of mixed states, that is so difficult to keep any sort of life together. And I think the loss of judgment and, making bad choices in those regards. But the thing is, you know, now I'm well, or when I was well, between episodes for me, some of the ways that I behaved and showed up in the world didn't really align with my own more general moral code or how I wanted to be. I mean, you've just mentioned there that you were mixing with people that you wouldn't normally mix with, and it was this and that. And so people in the outside world, quite rightly, should make their judgments on me as I showed up in the world. What else have they got to form an opinion of? That was how I showed up in the world. But I always had this terrible tension between how I showed up in the world, which was kind of failing at things and lacking judgment and being impulsive and not following through and withdrawing and all these terrible things, and how another part of me felt. And that tension between those, I just couldn't understand why I kept on messing everything up so badly. And even without actively an active state of bipolar, like an active episode, grief and anger would be reasonable reactions to all of those things.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm just gonna say like one more quick thing, like about the lack of judgment. Like there were times where I remember I was like in my early 20s, I was living on my own, and the internet was still pretty new, and eBay was brand new, and I didn't really fully understand how eBay worked. And I would like, I'm addicted to like the bidding at the end, and I bought a moped, a 3-wheeled moped. It's a Honda. I actually still have it. I have to get rid of it. It's like a demon. It's down in my basement. It's like a demon that haunts me. And I did that, and then I had another thing. I had this row cycle. It's a 3-wheel bike that you row with. It was for paraplegics, so you can't use your legs. And that I actually still have too. That I probably have a chance to rebuild and actually use it. But even after the first, I got the first one, so I should have learned how eBay worked. Like if you click bid and you win, you have to pay for this thing, and you're going to get it. But I still continued to do stuff like that, and then at one point, I remember getting an overdraft notice from my bank account because I bought something on eBay. And I thought it was funny. And I made a challenge to myself, like, how many overdraft notices can I get before they're going to cut me off? Well, I'm going to find out. And I just went and bought a whole bunch of shit that I don't need. I'm a drummer, so I bought a whole bunch of percussion. I had all this stuff showing up to the house. And I was surprised. It was like 2 weeks before they cut me off. But I knew what I was doing, but it didn't really matter. I thought it was funny. I knew there was going to be repercussions. I didn't realize how bad. And that just goes to show the lack of judgment. Now, here I am in my early 20s. I'm living on my own in my own condo. I own a condo, so I have a mortgage. I have a car payment. You would think I'm like a responsible adult at that point. I have a full-time job. But look at the stupid things that I was doing because I had zero judgment.
It's a It's an interesting thing, and we need to temper this with here in Australia and America, we have involuntary mental health care. So the fact that I might be making bad judgments about who I'm picking up at the pub on Friday night does not mean that I am incapable of assessing the side effect of a medication, for example. So, and we do have such things as supported decision making. So, Stephen and I are talking quite freely about lack of judgment. Um, this is not as simple as just being able to write someone off and saying, "Oh, well, you're bipolar, you lack judgment." That would be a mistake based on the conversation that Stephen and I are having because you just heard Stephen say he owned a condo, he's got a mortgage. I mean, obviously, this is a man capable of doing stuff. So this is not a man who completely lacks capacity because he happens to have bipolar disorder. And that's a bit of a caveat there because I could also really explore that loss of judgment with you in a conversation. I think it would be really interesting, but we'd have to be able to have much more time for a longer conversation because then we would have to do the other side of that. As how was I able to manage, for example, I did my final divorce settlement from inside an inpatient unit, right? The final financial document for that I did from inside an inpatient unit. So there is impulsivity about things in the moment. And then there's also, I still have a brain and the capacity of making long term decisions. And so it's a really complicated area. Um, but maybe it's another conversation. But yes, it's a difficult part of the illness, but it doesn't mean that anybody out there has the right to look at someone with bipolar disorder and just assume that what is happening is a loss of judgment. It's a lot more nuanced than that, as you know, Stephen. But I just want to put that out there. Yeah, you go.
Of course, I agree, and I would love to have you back on. I have like so many things that I want to talk to you about, and we have so much in common. I really find just everything you say I find so interesting, and it's interesting how we can be so different but so much the same as well. So we spoke about enough negativity, how messed up we were, right? And the anger and the irritability. So let's talk about our desire to stay happy and calm because I don't really hear many people talk about that. I say it all the time because to me, happy and calm is the opposite of angry and irritable. And that's what I'm looking for. So, what does calm and happiness look like to you now?
Yeah. So, um, for me, calm and happy are important things, but that doesn't necessarily, for me to be happy, that doesn't mean necessarily a life without struggle or hardships. I believe in that flourishing has struggles within flourishing. You know, flourishing is a wonderful thing to be, but it doesn't come without challenges are part of it. They're part of the learning of that. So I'm really appreciative. Even in my bipolar journey, I mean, I wouldn't be the person I am. And I've learned a lot from those extreme states. It's been really valuable. So I just want to come back to keto with this too, because it's part of the answer to your question, Stephen. So when I first went into ketosis, the actual state of ketosis, I had this energy that was calm. And it was like, I'd had energy before. Goodness, I'd experienced hypomania. I knew what energy looked like. Energy and I were good friends. But I'd never had energy with calm, not since I was a child. And there was a fundamental difference in the quality of that I felt and I recognized, and it was something new because at the start, when I went into ketosis, having this energy, that level of energy, no more afternoon naps, no more tiredness, plenty of energy to get through the day. Um, that was the only time I'd had that in my life for the previous 35 years was when it was associated with a hypomanic episode. So I was really quite frightened of this energy that came along with keto. And the thing that allowed me to not be frightened by that was really asking myself, was that a calm energy, a platform from which I could calmly assess what my needs, my wants, my desires, my decision making was, and then calmly step off in any direction that I wanted to? Or was it a driven energy? And that calm energy has become one of the most beautiful things about keto for me. And also, it's what kept me going in the first year, because my first year on keto was pretty messy, to be honest. I don't know that there's some people out there, I suppose, who do keto perfectly from day one, but I wasn't one of them. I really wasn't one of them. And I messed it up and I fell off and I went on. But that calm, happy energy was like a little glimmer that when it was difficult to get a stable keto platform together, which I did get a stable keto platform together, and I've continued on quite easily from that platform ever since. But during the first year, as I was organising that and getting that together in my life, it was just the knowledge that calm and energy could go together. And to speak of what you just said then, calm and happy, I just remember sitting on my porch one day and just sitting there in the sunshine, nothing special was happening. And I realised that in the past few months, there'd been something in my life that I'd made a decision about. And I made a decision. I'd then done all the actions to make that decision a reality. I'd followed through with that decision. I'd done all the actions. I'd made a start. I'd done the middle work. I'd got to the end. I'd achieved the thing that I was looking for when I began the decision. And I sat there on my porch and I thought, it was like a revelation. It was like another light bulb moment for me. And a light bulb went off in my head and I went, I think that this is what normal people have. I think this is how, and this is how normal people have done it, Shan. This is how they've managed to have careers and progressions and steady life. They've had this. And I really hadn't ever had the ability in my life to just calmly pursue a path and then be unimpeded or reasonably unimpeded. Everyone has obstacles, but reasonably, compared to bipolar, reasonably unimpeded to follow that pathway. And so, happiness and calmness, part of happiness for me is to be able to look at a North Star and then pursue it, and to be able to deal with the stresses and struggles along the way without being derailed into a huge period of serious mental illness. Yeah, happy and calm.
That's great. I'm laughing over here because you're describing my experience when I first started smoking pot when I was like 16. Because I felt calm and kind of happy, and I felt like normal. I was like, that's what I said to myself. This is what my normal friends must feel like. Whatever normal is, I don't know, but that's exactly how I felt. Was this is probably how normal people feel. Yeah, yeah. For me, the happy and calm is it's like when I do regular keto, I can do regular keto at like 75% fat and I won't have bipolar, but I don't have that extra level of happiness and calm. And along with happiness, there's a whole lot of positive feelings that go along with that. One of them would be gratitude. Another one would also be generosity. Those all come along with the happiness. And if I do regular keto on a 1 to 10 scale, I'll be like an 8. And that's great. I would take an 8 any day, especially compared to the 1 or the 2 I used to be when I was suffering with bipolar. But I have found a new level when I do the 90% fat on most days. I can go from an 8 to a 10. I get this extra level of happiness and calm. And it's little things I notice, like when I walk outside in the backyard. One neighbor has dogs, the other neighbor has chickens and a rooster. And how does my brain react when I hear the dogs barking? Does it say, shut those fucking dogs up? Would you put those dogs away? Or do I say, oh, the dogs are barking again? Or I might even just not even notice. I might even hear it and just, it doesn't even register. Same thing with the chickens over there. Sometimes I hear the chickens. I'm like, can you please put your fucking chickens away? Right. And that's how I know that I'm not at the level that I need to be. I'm not at that super happy and calm level. And we spoke about some of this when we were talking the other day. I'll also notice how my brain interprets interactions with strangers, like going to the store. And I'm walking into a store and somebody walks by me. Now, when I'm bad, like when I'm a 2, and somebody walks by me and they glance at me for a split second, right away my brain like wants to fight that person. Like, who do you think you are? What are you looking at? Who are you? That's what my brain does. And I'm not a violent or a confrontational person, but that's what my brain does. And when I get to the 8 that I was talking about, that person passes me and I see them and like it doesn't really register that much. But when I'm at a 10 and I have that extra level of calm and happiness, I'm going to smile at the person. I might say, "Hey, how's it going?" Or "How's, enjoying the weather?" Something like that. I might make a comment about whatever they just bought. Like I'm looking to be friends with the person. And that's that extra level of happiness and calm that I'm looking for. And that's why I do. People ask why I do the super high fat and why I do the diet I do it. And that's why, because I'm looking to get what I call the turbo boost. I want that extra level of happiness and calm that's there.
I could pick up so much from what you just said in that, because what you've just said in that is an absolute awareness of the difference between your 2 on the scale, your 8 on the scale, your 10 on the scale, and awareness of how that plays out in your actions, interactions in the world, which is useful for both bipolar management, if you're still having symptoms and management, that kind of awareness. But it's also really useful if you're trying to decide what's your perfect point for keto. But because I've gone rogue, I'm not going to talk about any of that. What I'm going to talk about is the fact that you just mentioned to going to the grocery store, because isn't that interesting? So you're at the grocery store and you're talking to the people there and you're having these lovely interactions, and that's a sign of your 10. And it's a great jumping off point, I think, for talking about how individual this is and how getting to know your own individual keto, getting to know your own individual bipolar is so important, because here's the thing. One of my early warning signs, right, for when this is one of my earliest warning signs for the hypermania might be beginning for me, would be if I went to the supermarket and I was talking to the cashier at the supermarket. If I wanted to make that cashier happy, right, if I just wanted to say, "Hi, how are you? How's it going? Great, nice, great, normal." But if I went to the supermarket and I wanted to make that person happy, I want that person to have a happy day. That person is a lovely person. They belong to a family of humankind, and we all should be happy in the universe. And I'm going to spend this interaction here to make that person happy. Yeah, red flag, warning flag. That's a huge warning sign for me. And I'm not actually joking about this. This is actually one of my first early warning signs, is being over invested in strangers' happiness and believing that I am somehow able to make an intervention in their life that will bring them closer to joy. I mean, there's a level of grandiosity about that that's a red flag for hypermania. But in the context of what you just said, you see, you're looking at people and giving them the side eye, and that small, tiny interaction. So when I'm at a 2, because depression is one of my bipolar things, when I'm at a 2, I can't make eye contact with the person that I'm walking past in the supermarket, because they'll see the despair in my eyes, and I don't want to infect another human being with that. And so I wouldn't make eye contact with people, not because I was socially awkward or anxiety, but because I didn't want to infect another human being with that. Um, and I would also notice that I wasn't very, probably because I wasn't making eye contact, I probably wasn't very well able to judge physical space around people. So I would step the wrong way in the supermarket, looking back at what I've just said now, perhaps my eye contact was part of that. But see, so that's like 2 stories, isn't it? What we've just shown. You've shown how your, I don't wanna say you like irritability, because rage was also one of my bipolar symptoms in a mixed state. I once went to a GP and said, "Doctor, I have rage." And they didn't take that seriously. They just wrote that off as a woman's menstrual cycle, although I said to them, "It's not in line with my menstrual cycle, but I have rage." So, of all the 25 years that I was misdiagnosed before I was correctly diagnosed, that rage could have been a diagnostic point, because I'm not sure how many doctors actually have patients walk into their surgery and say, "I have rage," and it's unexplained, inexplicable, and it's not justified by the world, but I have it nonetheless. Or at least they could have measured testosterone. I don't know why they didn't do any. What was I saying before I went rogue? I was saying that it'd be lovely to segue off that conversation into perhaps individual ketos. Because just like there's individual bipolars, there's individual ketos, because our ketos look quite different, I'm sure. And of all the thousands, hundreds, hopefully soon to be millions of people on the planet, there'll be vegan ketos, carnivore ketos, and everything in between ketos.
Absolutely, yeah, and that's how I came up with the name for my channel, and the name that's gonna be for my coaching business is Find
Yeah.
Your Keto. Because just like no two people are the same, no two keto diets are the same, and I wanna help you find your keto. That's what I'm trying to help with people, is to find the keto that works for them. I have an accountability group going right now with, I think, I forget if it's 4 or 5 people in there. Everybody is doing things differently. Everybody's at a different fat percentage. Everybody's eating things differently. I have one in there who's a vegan doing keto. I have one in there that's a carnivore like myself. So yeah, it's exactly right. No two keto diets are going to be. Now I know that you're carnivore, but I'm sure that your carnivore is different than mine.
Well, you know, I'm not I'm accidentally carnivore. Um,
Accidentally.
yeah, well, because I don't really have massive sensitivities when I eat, um, like when I eat veggies and stuff, I don't have huge problems with that, and I didn't actually have a hugely greater sense of clarity or anything when I went carnivore from keto. I really was traveling very, very well on just ordinary keto, and I still eat unsweetened chocolate, and I made a keto birthday cake because my daughter was having a birthday, so I made her birthday cake, and then I made a keto cake as well that had ingredients that certainly weren't carnivore in it, but I would say that 98% of my diet is meat products. Most of that I put down to laziness and deliciousness and healthiness. So it's lazy, delicious, and healthy. And when I have to cook large meals for large groups of people, I think, oh goodness, this is expensive at the supermarket. And what is all this stuff? And I spent an hour in the kitchen prepping a meal for a group the other day. I was affronted. I don't do that on carnivore. I'm very, very lazy. But when I was doing keto, here's a shock horror. I don't like avocados, right? So my keto never included um, avocados, and I think I think most people in our community would agree that if you took out seed oils, ultra processed foods, white sugar, and flour, yeah, you'd be healthier.
Hmm.
And I think those 4 things, if people did that, they'd be healthier. For those of us who've decided that we wanna get into a ketogenic state, we all know that that's gonna depend essentially on our, fat to protein and carbohydrate ratios. So once you've made that decision to get into a ketogenic state, however you do that with your diet, and there are healthy ways to do that and unhealthy ways to do that, you know? Or healthier, whatever. But once you've done that, and once you're looking at that keto, I hear people talking a lot about the numbers on how deeply they are in keto, or what's a therapeutic number for keto. I am N equals 1. I'm an experiment on myself. This field is new. We don't have a huge amount of research on some of those details. So I just want to put it out there, a couple of things. In the early days when I was doing keto, if I fell off the bandwagon, I would have um, quite severe reactions to the reintroduction of carbs in my diet and falling out of ketosis, like coming off an SSRI. Really, I would have anxiety, hopelessness, and weeping within a day or so. That seems to have softened a bit as the years go by. That reaction, if I eat something inappropriate, is not quite so extreme. In the early days, I used to very much try to keep my ketones always between 1.5 and 2.5. Anywhere above 3.5 or 4 made me feel a bit wired, right? But that was my N equals 1. Moving forward into what I'm doing now, I've noticed I'm also not a In the early days, I measured a lot. Now I don't measure very much at all because I said I'm a very lazy person. But sometimes I get interested and do some experiments. And if you're going to do an experiment, then measure the outcome. Otherwise, how do you know the experiment works? But when I do measure these days because I get interested about things, I notice that my ketones are actually tracking lower, but not one single whisper of a bipolar symptom. So that's changed for me across a 4-year span. I don't know what other healing has taken place or what's happened there, but I'm very much N equals 1. It's what works for you. I care very much that I don't have bipolar 2 disorder. I absolutely don't care 100% what any number says on any measurer or what color a wee stick is. I 100% don't care unless I need that measurement for something that I'm trying to do. But do I care whether my ketones run at 1.4, 1.8, drop down to zero point 0.9, or up at 2.5? I don't. I have a range. There is a range. My range will be different to your range. It'll be different to Stephen's range. Stephen's given beautiful examples of those small interactions in the outside world where he can probably guess. You know how you said, Stephen, that was a 2, an 8, or a 10? Does that correlate to your ketone numbers?
Not always. It can, yes,
Yeah.
but not always. So I can give you a good example. So let's say I'm in a deep ketosis for a couple of days, and my ketones have been in the mid 2s, my glucose is in the mid 80s. I'm feeling great. And then I weight lift. I eat a ton of protein because I eat a pretty low protein diet on most days, but I eat a ton of protein. The next day, I wake up, my glucose is now in the 90s. My ketones may be less than 1. But because I was doing well and I only did it one day, I'm still going to feel good that day. Now, as long as I hop right back on to like a 90% that day, I'm going to be good. But if I keep doing that protein thing for 2 days or 3 days and my numbers stay low for a couple of days, then I'm going to be affected. Right. It could also be if there's a cold in the house and I'm like, I have a sore throat and a headache for a couple of days and my numbers are down, then I'm not going to feel as well. But if it's just one day, it doesn't always correlate. Now, I've had like over the years, I had been obsessive with my testing. I've worn CGMs and I used to prick my finger all day long. And I would be shocked sometimes that I would feel so terrible and I would take my numbers and my ketones would be really high and my glucose really low. So it didn't always correlate. Sometimes it did. Sometimes I'd be feeling great and I would take the test and be like, why do my numbers look like shit today? I feel so good. That would happen too. So sometimes it does, but not always.
And that's interesting, isn't it? Because everything that's right. Our mental health is not everything about ketones, as you just said. If you're having a bad day, why shouldn't you feel like rubbish? Ketosis or not ketosis,
Right.
we're human beings with all those ranges of emotions and emotional responses and feelings, and it's not all about ketones. I mean, ketosis, I don't think is anymore um, a magic pill to human suffering, but geez, it can be a miraculous intervention for those of us who are made sick by carbohydrate-based diets. It really can, and I get caught in this space. I saw a post from Georgia Eade came across my LinkedIn feed in the last couple of days, and she says, "Remission is possible." And I go round wandering, going, healing is possible, remission is possible. Is it cure? Is it unsickening? I don't know, but after all the messaging I received, it feels miraculous. It feels miraculous. But I don't think it is a miracle. I think it is an unsickening. And I think how any individual is going to respond to it is so individual. But, what are the side effects, guys? So your sleep apnea might go away, your diabetes might reverse, your arthritis might improve. I mean, your vertigo might improve. There's so many stories of the side effects of keto, and they're all good news. So it's kind of like, I don't know. It just seems to me I understand because I did this myself before I started keto. I did not know that I'd be able to follow a diet like this. I just thought, oh, that's so restrictive. I'm going to miss so much. I adore toast. I adore pasta. I can't do that. That's too hard. And which is silly because, like, I have bipolar disorder, right? So you would think that that would be a reasonable motivator because bipolar disorder is extremely hard. But even though I had bipolar disorder being extremely hard, it was still took me some time to get my head around jumping into a ketogenic diet because I thought it was a diet of restriction, and it's turned out to be the opposite, not just for me, but for so many people in this community. I find this now, I have so much more freedom around food than I ever had. And I mean, I think that's probably something that's, do you feel that, Stephen? Freedom around food? Did you have
Absolutely.
problems with food or food
Oh,
addiction before you began?
absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Because I have a strong addiction history, very strong. And so that's the reason that I can't do the keto chocolate like you do. I can't because I can't moderate it. And that's the reason that I've gotten to the carnivore diet that I do, because I either react poorly to too many things or I just can't moderate and regulate them. And I wanted to say real quick that you were given a list of all the things that might improve on keto. And I wanted to say for people like my mother or my wife, who I'm hoping will do keto one day, that seasonal allergies for a lot of people will either improve or completely go away. Also, anything related to hormones, thyroid function, hormone function, things like that. For everybody, it improves or goes away. But yeah, let's talk about food freedom. Yeah, absolutely. So I didn't really have a food problem until I changed my diet. Once I tried to take out things that I liked, it became hard for me. And food at times has become a vice for me because I don't smoke pot anymore. I don't have any other vices. And so when I'm not doing well, I want to make myself feel better. So I have a few ways I can do that. And they're all going to be, if I do them in excess, they're all going to be harmful. So I could even eat too much meat and harm myself. I can eat the wrong meats. So I react poorly to pork and chicken. I prefer ruminants. And so I believe this to be an inflammation thing. I must have neuroinflammation from these things. So if I eat conventionally raised chicken, I will get a skin reaction. I will get a particular kind of itchiness in certain areas of my body, and I'll have a little bit of gas and bloating from it. And I have done these tests. Cocoa butter is another thing. I love cocoa butter. It's delicious. I used to put it in my coffee when I drank coffee. It's 100% fat. So you'd think it would fit my high fat diet, which it does. And I have done tests with this where I had 90% fat for several weeks at a time, ketones in the threes, glucose in the 80s or lower. And I am irritable and angry, and my skin is terrible, and my stomach is terrible. It's from the cocoa butter. And I've done this inadvertently. I did this test with cocoa butter and taking anti-inflammatories like ibuprofen. And if I take the anti-inflammatories, I don't have as strong effect at things like cocoa butter. Found this out by accident, right? And I've also done this test with pork and chicken. And so I can eat like pork belly, which is like 90% fat, and still have my numbers great. All my numbers look perfect. If you looked at my numbers, you would say he's a 10, he's doing great. But I will be irritable and angry. I will be at a 6 or a 7, not even an 8, and I'm itchy and I'm pooping too much and I've got gas and bloating and all that kind of stuff just from pork.
Oh, I love this conversation because there's so many differences, aren't there? It's fascinating. So I began with keto, and I just did. I dropped my carbs under 20 grams. That's what ketosis looks for me like for me. If I keep my carbs under 20 grams, I stay in ketosis. That's my baseline learning. But that was very much a baseline learning, and I had no idea what I was going to learn along the way. So it's really interesting to hear you say, for example, that you can't do those sugar sweet the sweetened chocolates that are not sugar but still have sweeteners because it kicks off those addictive pathways. Interestingly enough, so it does for me. for a little bit. So I know that if I eat something with a sweetener and then I do that twice, I'm going to want to do that 3 times and 4 times. So I know that if I eat something with a sweetener, I know I'm going to sort of pay for that in the sense that I'm going to want more of that. And you might be sitting there going, well, why is that a problem? Because if you choose a decent sweetener, it's probably not going to kick you out of ketosis, right? Now, why that's a problem for me is that over these years, as I've been doing this, because I've overcome addictions too, is I've realized that I kind of don't like the feeling of an outside substance or a thing having hooks into me that I'm sort of a slave to it. I was an absolute carb addict. And when you give up carbs, right, one of the first things that happens is the craving for carbs goes away.
Mhm.
And when that craving goes away, that's why I use a phrase like freedom, because that's where your freedom exists, because you're free from those cravings. So as the years have gone by, this desire to be relaxed, comfortable, and easy, and without difficulties, I just wanted to get rid of things that were annoying or difficult and make my life easier. So, for example, one of the ones that happened along the keto journey for me was I was making bread with almond meal. And I began to realize that almond meal was one of those things that made me want more almond meal. Um, if I did it with macadamia nut meal, not so bad, but almond meal made me want more almond meal. And it got to the point as I come along this journey towards freedom and resolution of addictions that as I realized that these things were making me want more of them, you've got a choice, haven't you? You can fight that desire for more, right? And limit yourself and moderate yourself and exercise discipline. But when I began the keto diet and dropped out carbs, I realized that abstinence, just dropping them out, meant I didn't have to do that fight. I didn't have to have that discipline. I didn't have to do that work. What I could simply do was just remove the stuff that caused all the discipline problems. And so my diet's evolved over the years. And one of the things that's happened in my diet over the years is where I've noticed that things cause me problems. I tend to go, oh, I don't know that I can be bothered with that anymore. And these addiction journeys through food addiction, I also use marijuana. I was also a pack a day smoker, not anymore. These journeys with addictions for me became easier to somehow get a handle on once my brain and my body was fully fueled from a ketogenic diet. So that ketogenic platform has actually become, this is totally unexpected for me, but has actually become a platform for me to address addiction from. And that's been the most fascinating learning. So if someone is listening in this audience today who knows me, and now they might say this, they might say, Shannon, what about the cream? What about the cream, Shannon? Um, I don't drink milk because lactose gives me a hard time. I eat butter. I don't want to overeat butter. If I don't eat butter because I've eaten something else fatty, I don't think, oh, I might sneak some butter in. Cream still has its hooks into me. I still have I understand that my relationship with cream is not just because it's nutritious, fatty, and useful, that there's something else in my relationship with cream that's happening there, that the thought of giving up cream feels difficult. You know, and when I started the ketogenic diet, the thought of giving up asparagus did not seem difficult. The thought of giving up toast seemed difficult. You know, the thought of cream seems difficult. So I'm not perfect. I'm not there. Lucky for me, I can actually tolerate cream and butter quite well. But here's how nuanced N equals 1 is, Stephen, right? So cheddar cheese and me, not friends, because cheddar cheese makes me want to eat a lot of cheddar cheese. I love cheddar cheese.
Me too.
Yeah. But feta, yeah, I don't have a struggle with feta. I can have feta in the fridge and I can eat some or not some. But cheddar, I do occasionally eat it because I love it and it's delicious. I do occasionally have a sweetener, but I'm aware, so yeah.
I love this because not very many people are as aware as you are. And so I really feel comfortable talking to you about this because we relate to each other. So I said me too with the cheddar, but for me it's any dairy. I can't do the cream. I can't do any dairy whatsoever. And now I have thoroughly tested this over the years, and people will say, well, there's A1 and there's A2 dairy, and then people are like, you can't even do butter. I'm like, nope, I can't do, but I can't do ghee. I've tried making my own ghee. I've tried buying ghee because, like you said, it takes away the food freedom. It will have its hooks in me. And what will happen is, especially with dairy, well, with anything I react to, I get the skin reactions first. Depending on what kind of dairy I consume, I'll get a different skin reaction in a different part of my body. It's predictable every time. Butter will give me zits on my temple. Like I just know exactly what it'll do to me because I've tested it. But it'll have the hooks in me, and so I'll be falling asleep at night, and I'll be thinking about, I can't wait to have butter tomorrow. I'm like fantasizing about it. I wake up in the morning, I'm not even hungry, but it's like I can't wait for the butter, and I think about it throughout the day. Cheese, especially cheese, will do that to me really bad. And I'm thinking about it all day long, and it's taking up a lot of space in my head. It's got its hooks in me, and I'll find myself fantasizing about wanting more cheese. I'm not hungry at all. It has nothing to do with food. It could be right after I ate. And that is not food freedom for me. That is not freedom. And I've even discovered that other things, like I said, with pork and chicken that I react to. And unfortunately, they're really delicious. I love them. Especially, I like all the fatty, grizzly parts that nobody wants. I want the pork belly that's mostly fat. I want the the spare ribs. I like the tips of the spare ribs, like the part that most people would discard. Or if I'm having chicken, I want the leg quarters and the back. And I love that stuff. But even those items will have their hooks in me to where I'm thinking about them. I'm going to bed at night. Oh man, I can't wait to have some pork tomorrow. Or just throughout the day, I'm thinking about it. And anything that can have its hooks in me like that, it's not food freedom. And if I eat ruminant meat, if I eat lamb and beef, it doesn't happen to me. Now, I enjoy every bite of every meal when it's ruminant meat, and I look forward to it. I do. And I may fall asleep at night thinking, oh, yeah, I've got that T-bone I'm going to put on the grill and I'll smile, but I'm not fantasizing about it. It's not consuming room in my head, right? I'm not thinking about it all day long. There's a big difference there.
Yeah. It's I'm just aware that people listening to this, 'cause you gotta remember this has unfolded for me over 4 years. Like, this is individual learnings that will come to people. Some people are like one thing, some will like another. Like, it's gonna be different for everybody. So don't look at what Stephen and I are talking about and going, "Well, that just seems bizarre." Go just start with an open mind of curiosity of, "Do I want to try out what a ketogenic state is like?" And then just start from there. And then what happens on your journey will be exactly what happens on your journey with food. Because I understand that if you're listening to this and Stephen's just said, chicken's delicious, but I decide not to do it, you might be sitting back and going, well, that does sound restrictive. That sounds restrictive to me, not free, because Stephen said it's delicious, but he won't do it. So I just wanted to share this little anecdote, which is so I became accidentally carnivore, right? And I eat my steaks and they are delicious. And beef fat is probably delicious, absolutely delicious. Before I went carnivore, I used to regularly have lamb chops and bacon, right? Regularly, lamb chops and bacon were absolutely part of my diet, right? And then I accidentally went carnivore. And guess what? I don't eat bacon anymore. And I don't eat lamb chops. Now, you would think when because people would say, oh, well, there's not many foods you can eat on a carnivore diet because they all have to be animal based. So that wipes out, the entire plant kingdom. Um, so you would think with what you're left in the animal kingdom that you'd try and eat a huge variety from that animal kingdom because you want variety. And I used to eat bacon regularly on the regular. Once a week, bacon would be in my diet, chicken would be in my diet, all these things would be in my diet. And I accidentally went carnivore, and I don't know why. I don't know why, but I'm not interested in lamb or bacon anymore. And I am probably the person who is most surprised by that as anybody, because when I certainly went carnivore, I thought that it would never be a long term thing because obviously there aren't many foods and I'd be bored. And it turns out I don't even eat as many foods as I could eat. I don't react badly to bacon. I don't. as I say, completely surprised, completely odd. I mean, odd things happen along this ketogenic journey. So I think, you just start where you start with some open curiosity and do some experiments on the way and do what works for you. And in the early days, I would probably measure because you've decided to do a ketogenic journey, so you really probably need to know whether you're in ketosis. Otherwise, how can you tell if you're even on a ketogenic journey yet? But for me, that was, 20 grams less of carbs, and everything else that's happened along the way has been an unexpected and amazing journey through healing of addictions, physical health. I mean, I know that we're, getting towards the end of our interview, and we haven't even talked about body recomposition and why I suddenly came out of menopause. And like I was technically in menopause, and I came back out again. And now I'm older, and I'm going back that way again. But gosh, the physical, wonderful things that happened alongside the mental health benefits are just beautiful. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm so glad that you mentioned all of what you just said, because it speaks to how no two ketos are the same. Because you're saying that cheddar cheese will affect you, but feta is okay, and you're still doing the cream. So like if I did those things, it would ruin me. I would be ruined within days or within weeks. Like if I started having cream, I may have a tablespoon today, and then it's going to be a cup tomorrow, and then I've done this. I'm drinking from the heavy cream container, and I'm probably putting like a chocolate protein powder in my mouth at the same time. It's the same thing like with nut butters. I love any kind of nut butter in a jar, and I'll have a spoonful a day. And then after 3 days, I'm sitting there with the jar, and then the jar's gone, and then I want more. And then I might be going down the street to the store and getting a Snickers and then ice cream, and then forget it. Then I'm screwed because now I'm going to be depressed again. You know, so it just goes to show you. But it's been 6 years for me, and it's been a lot of experimentation along the way. I didn't just wake up one day and be like, well, I'm going to do carnivore. It kind of happened gradually by listening to my body and following what feels my best. And if anybody thinks that my diet seems strict or restrictive, I understand why you would think that, especially coming from the standard American diet. But what I like to say to that is it's not restrictive. If I eat, look, I have choices and I can choose to eat whatever I want. I can eat the pork and chicken. And I've actually been eating a lot of that lately. It starts with sharing those things with Samantha usually because she doesn't eat as much beef and we don't have very many opportunities to eat together. So it's like I make the excuse, like it's bonding. It's bonding, but like it's like an excuse to eat that stuff. And so I have the choice. I can choose to eat those things, but I'm going to suffer for it. And then by doing that, that restricts me from feeling my best. That is restrictive. Okay. That restricts me from feeling my best and then from being the best dad that I can be. That restricts me. So choosing to not eat those items allows me to get from the 8 to the 10 and be as calm as I can and be the best dad. It's liberating. It's freedom. It's a gift. Now, it's not always easy to remember that, but it is a gift. And I need to take advantage of that and try to live life to its fullest and just make the right decisions all the time.
You said there that choosing to do that. I was listening to some of the work in the food addiction space, and one of the language changes they're promoting there is to take away, for people who want to be abstinent, for people who can't moderate, is to take away the word restriction and replace it with the word discernment. I'm not restricted, I'm discerning. I make a choice. I absolutely make a choice. And you know what? Even through all my mental health recovery, just touching back on what something that you said earlier, like, you're talking about your ketones are fine, but you feel rubbish on that particular day. So I have days where, oh gosh, stress happens or whatever happens, and I'm still totally capable of soothing myself with food, of using food as a self-soothing behavior. So I just wanted to put a quick one out there, and because there's a lot of purists in this space, and I always say there are no carnivore police, there are no keto police. They're not there. They don't exist. Don't buy into that sort of mindset. So, I mean, I personally would suggest that everybody out there should have a go-to that keeps them into ketosis. But if they are self-soothers with food, and it has been a terrible day at the office, it is so much better to know that if you're going to eat something that's kind of like junk food, it might as well be keto junk food than not keto junk food. So in the early days, I don't do this now because it would kick off different problems. But in the early days, I used to eat diet aeroplane jelly. So red jelly, full of chemicals, completely just chemicals, nothing dyed for that, natural dyed for that red jelly, completely full of artificial sweeteners, bad artificial sweeteners even, right? Red jelly, artificially sweetened red packet jelly. And I used to eat that with cream. And um, these days, I will make a keto mug cake with almond meal if I'm desperate to sell. And that is so much a better choice for me than that Snickers bar. If I am going to reach for something to emotionally soothe myself with food, I would rather eat that mug cake. And I still might have problems moderating that, and I might end up eating 2 mug cakes or whatever, depending on how bad the day was, right? Because I also have binge eating in my background. But at the end of the day, after I've eaten that stuff, I'll still be in ketosis. So I've learned over the years that there are going to be moments where all my best dietary choices are going to go out the window, and I'm probably going to self-sabotage or self-soothe. So I might as well do that with something that keeps me in ketosis than something that throws me out of ketosis. Why? Because it's easier.
Yeah, and that's great advice, and not even just for the self-soothing, which a lot of us do, but for treats, for holidays, for occasions. When I interviewed Georgia Eid, I asked her if she did that for special occasions, and she said that her cheat or her treat would be dairy. Now, she doesn't react well to dairy, but she said exactly what you just said, that it's a lot better for her to have some dairy than to go have a bunch of carbs. And I've done
Yeah,
the same
cool.
thing. I always suffer in the fall, and this fall I ate some Halloween candy, and then I was craving candy really bad. And instead of going back and having more candy, I was eating coconut oil out of the jar, and I was having the chocolate health code powder. You know, Dr. Ben Bickman.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a protein shake. It's really a meal replacement shake, and I was using it for Samantha, so I'd have the jar, and it's delicious. It's got monk fruit and stevia in it, so it's sweet. Those sweeteners are worse for me than regular cane sugar. I have a harder time getting off of those than I do regular sugar, but I'd still rather put a scoop of that powder in my mouth, a scoop of coconut oil, and then my fat for the day still looks pretty good. I still have ketones the next day, and at least I'm not destroying myself with Snickers and ice cream and all the things that I really want.
Yeah.
What led you to consider tapering off your psychiatric medications?
Well, I started tapering off my psychiatric medications, or using them in a different way, I should say. Well, both actually. So I'd been using antipsychotics every single day, da-da-da-da, and I did more and more reading about antipsychotics, and I made a decision that I really only wished to use them in acute episodes. And then I spent some years realizing, new learning again, that if I used an antipsychotic in an acute episode, it wasn't just a matter of stopping it at the end of that acute episode. So I had to learn how to taper off at the end of every acute episode of bipolar. And as I became better and better at doing that, because I used to, I wasn't in, you take an antipsychotic, it's got an sedative effect in hypomania, then I become depressed and I'm completely without energy. And so that sedative effect of the antipsychotic, I really felt that. And then I felt over sedated in depression. But I learned that I couldn't just stop. I had to learn to taper slowly off. So I'd use them to limit a hypomania. I'd go into depression. I'd feel oversedated, and slowly I learnt that it was wiser to extend that by a month or two to come off that. So although I might have an episode that went for maybe 3 months, I'd probably have a antipsychotic usage that went for 6. So I'd done a little bit of that, and I'd reduced my use of antipsychotics. And then I sort of just, I don't know, I was still having episodes. And as I said, I'd lost faith that medication was going to be the entire pathway. And I'd gone through an iatrogenic benzodiazepine addiction where I used those medications exactly as they were prescribed. I never took one single extra tablet than what was prescribed to me. And I ended up with an addiction that was enormously difficult, complicated all my problems. And when I was facing that, and that was in a period of rapid cycling too, Stephen, so you can appreciate how difficult that would have been, I found that my clinician was not able to give me the advice that I needed. And I ended up discovering the Ashton manual on benzodiazepine deprescribing. And that was my start at looking at deprescribing. And then I used the learning from that benzodiazepine addiction when I wanted to get off lamotrigine in the end. And I ended up using hyperbolic tapering principles because I read an article published by Mark Harowitz in 2021, the May volume of the Schizophrenia Bulletin, about tapering antipsychotics. Now, I was trying to taper a mood stabilizer, but I learnt the general principles of hyperbolic tapering. Then a little bit longer. So now as I'm doing that tapering off that lamictal, I come across the learning about epilepsy. I come across a ketogenic diet. And then what led my deprescribing journey from that point on was the fact that I just didn't have symptoms to manage. So why would you take medications if you have no symptoms? I mean, you don't, do you? If you take a paracetamol because you've got a headache, but you don't keep taking paracetamol when the headache's gone. So once I had no symptoms, it was sort of like, okay, well, now I have to, deprescribe these medications because I have no symptoms. And that took me 3 years to do that. And I've since become an advocate for deprescribing. And I know it'll slow up our interview a bit, but I just need to say that perhaps the more traditional route used for deprescribing medications was to do step reductions. In a nutshell, hyperbolic tapering is to go, okay, well, it has to be person-centered. That's the first thing. So the first thing is, how much of a step can I do? And nobody can tell you that. Only you will be able to discover that. It's a very individual thing. So the first thing is person-centered. The second thing is that the way our brains work and the receptors in our brains, whatever steps you're taking at start of that taper will need to get smaller and smaller and smaller. So by the end of it, instead of taking steps, you'll probably be taking tiptoes. And you can go and read the work of Mark Horowitz, or you can go and look at the Maudsley's deprescribing guidelines, and you'll get much more detail about that. But if you understand that what steps is person-centered, and that those steps will come down to tiptoes, right, because that's the nature of the way these medications work in our brain. That's two of the principles of hyperbolic tapering. And the third principle of hyperbolic tapering is after you reduce, stabilize before the next reduction. So you reduce, stabilize, reduce. How long will you need to stabilize for, Shannon? How long is a piece of string? You will need to stabilize for as long as that works for you. So I once did a taper of a medication that I sort of had a plan that I might use 2 weeks between reductions. I might reduce, 2 weeks, reduce. And I was doing really small reductions because I'd learnt that it's easier to do small reductions and get the job done easily than to try and do it quickly, have it all go pear-shaped and have it take a long time. But so I was sort of hoping that it would be 2 weeks in the stabilization period. But what happened on that particular medication was that one of those periods was 6 weeks. My stabilizing platform was 6 weeks. One of my part of deprescribing in that medication was actually an up titration. I'd gone a little bit too quick. As I went down from step to tiptoe, I hadn't tiptoed enough and I'd still taken a step, big bit too big a step for the end. And I was affected by it and I was uncomfortable and it was difficult. And I thought, well, I don't want to be uncomfortable and difficult. So I need to go back up a bit and go a little bit more slowly. And that going up and going a little bit more slowly, that gets us back to the first principle, which is person-centered. Steps become tiptoes, reduce, stabilize, reduce. The best way to do this, with your clinician. There are other also wonderful resources on the internet and that, and it is a difficult process, and for some it can be easy, some it can be difficult. It's a mixed bag. It's very person centered. Maudsley deprescribing guidelines. Take them to your clinician. Say to your clinician, I'd like to use hyperbolic tapering principles, please, if you ever find yourself in the fortunate position where you've decided to deprescribe. So that's my tapering journey. In a nutshell, it took 3 years.
That is excellent. Thanks for sharing. I wish this stuff was around when I was still taking meds and even when we were trying Samantha on some medications a couple years ago. But it's interesting that the way I ended up doing things was pretty much what you're saying. So I remember when Samantha was on Lamictal a couple years ago, and they wanted to just take her off, basically. They want to get her from, I think whatever she was on, then 100 for a week, 50 and then 25, and you're done. I'm like, no way, we're not doing that. I was using a pill cutter, and I was literally taking chips off the pills towards the end and weighing it on a milligram scale. And there were times where I went to because I was halving the dose each time, and one time I halved it, and she was not good, so I went back up for like a week, and then I started doing chips, and I was doing the stabilized thing, but I wasn't doing it based on this theory, but it's what I discovered works. I had done it for myself in the past too. For myself coming off Lamictal, I'd wait 2 weeks, and I would cut the pills in half or cut them in a quarter or something in 2 weeks. And I didn't care how long it took. I just didn't want to suffer along the way. And I don't even remember how long it took. Effexor was the worst one for me. That was years ago. I got brain zaps from Effexor, and I couldn't go out in the sun. Like I couldn't drive. It was really, really bad with Effexor. I had to go super duper slow. It took me like 2 years to get off that drug. It was awful.
But what you say, 100%, you say you did it, but it wasn't, on those hyperbolic tapering things that you'd read. But this is how the hyperbolic tapering has headed into the mainstream. In the lived experience community, people like us who've been doing this, we really haven't had any choices. If we haven't been able to get off the medications that we needed to reduce in the normal way that we've been told, a lot of us have ended up in those small reductions. And, the story of Mark Harowitz is that he was training as a psychiatrist and he wanted to stop an antidepressant and he couldn't do it, and all hell broke loose. And he ended up having to go onto the internet forums to find out how to stop his medication. And he was just appalled as a trainee psychiatrist, A, that he hadn't learnt anything about this in his own training, and B, when he went to seek help from professionals, the help wasn't available. And that's unfolded now into the whole Maudsley deprescribing guidelines and the notion out there of hyperbolic tapering. If I can give a shout out, I'd like to give a shout out to Anna King in Tasmania, who's just published with Joanna Moncrief, and I'm going to get the name right, Catherine Wallace, about deprescribing again. And it can be a contested area. And I guess the reason we're talking about it today is if you're talking about a treatment like a ketogenic diet and you actually have remission from illness, then it is likely that you won't require medications anymore. And there's no clinician out there that's suggesting that people take medications that they don't require. I mean, no one says that. So many of us in this community get faced with these issues of, okay, I don't need this medication anymore because I have no symptoms. Where do I go from here? And so this is why, here we are talking about tapering. The other thing that we might talk about in this area is what happens with our LDL and cholesterol numbers. If you are on a high fat diet, not a high carbohydrate diet, your cholesterol numbers may change. And that's another part of this journey that people doing ketogenic diets are faced with. So I guess my general thoughts on this is, my general thoughts are adopting a ketogenic diet is the simplest thing in the world and also a very complicated thing. Very simple, keep your carbs under 20 grams. I'm in ketosis and I no longer have bipolar to manage. That sounds super simple, miraculous, easy. The actual experience is it is very simple The concept is very, very simple. The journey can be very, very complicated, and it will be very individual. And if you're one of those people whose LDL numbers go up, I urge you to perhaps I won't go into it, but just throw out a few names. Nick Norwitz, Paul Mason, Peter Bruckner. Talk if you're one of those people who LDL numbers on the cholesterol panel has changed since starting a ketogenic diet. My advice is like Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Don't panic. Seek more information. If you're one of those people who has tried to taper a medication because you no longer need it on a ketogenic diet, I say don't panic. Seek more information, because these learnings will be something that you may well come across as you progress in this pathway. Yeah.
Yeah. And for references, excuse me, references for cholesterol, you left out Dave Feldman and the cholesterol quote.
Dave Feldman's on that Nick Norwitz paper that's just
Yeah.
published.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Dave Feldman
And his film is
and
coming
Nick
out
Norwitz.
soon. His film is coming out soon. So that's going to be one for people to check out.
Absolutely. Yeah, if you remember those two names, if you remember Dave Feldman and Mark Harowitz, they will take you to learning points from there. Yeah, it's a big conversation, but those two names, if you were motivated and interested and able to research in that way, they would get you to a lot of valuable information.
Excellent. All right. Are we ready to get into our closing?
Yeah.
All right, cool. So I have 2 questions posed to your younger self. They're similar but different. The first one is related to diet and mental health. And the second one is not related to diet or mental health at all. Okay. So the first one is what is a piece of advice you'd give to your younger self before you discovered this diet, something that would have gotten you through the tough times?
I am a failure as a guest because in some ways I'm unable to answer this question. I thought about it deeply and I thought to myself, given given what I faced, I think what unfolded was what was. So for me to go back and think, well, how could I made it differently if I had different advice? For me, perhaps it's more like, what piece of advice would I give to my younger self would be perhaps that where I am as a younger person is not going to be where I am as an older person. And there's going to be a whole lot of getting of wisdom along the way. There's a beautiful book by an Australian author under the pen name Henry Handel Richardson called The Getting of Wisdom. And in it, an adolescent worries about the red lining on her hat at the start of the book. And at the end of the book, that adolescent has a very close friend die of tuberculosis. And the book's called The Getting of Wisdom because the things that I've learnt from and worried about initially change along the journey, and that's where wisdom is found.
That was a great answer. You're not a failure. Are you kidding? That was awesome.
But there was no one piece of advice, I don't know.
It doesn't matter. No, it doesn't matter. That was a great answer. So what about the second question? The second question is not related to diet or mental health. It's just if you could go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice, what would it be?
Shan, remember that you are one human being on a planet of many, many human beings, and you're just grand, mate. That would be my advice. My advice would be, Shan, just remember you're grand. You're grand, mate. You're not Hitler. You're not evil. You're grand. You're ordinary. You're grand. Grand.
That's great. If I could have received that advice from my future self, going back to our first question, that would have helped get me through the tough times for sure. That was good. Thank you. So my last one is what I call my signature question or my fat fueled philosophy. And this is a question that should encourage you to share a broader, more philosophical insight or a life lesson that ties into your experience with the ketogenic lifestyle and provides something meaningful and potentially new even after our in depth interview. So, what's one powerful piece of fat fueled philosophy, a life lesson, or a mantra that you've embraced on your ketogenic journey and you think could inspire our listeners?
Ask yourself, how good can I get it? How good can I get it? And then allow yourself to be curious as to what might be the answer to that question.
That is amazing. I'm going to give you a round of applause. I hope it comes out. Can you hear that?
I do. I feel warm and fuzzy. It's gorgeous.
No, that's great. I mean, that in essence explains why I do the extreme and restrictive and strict diet that I do, because I'm trying to see how good I can get it. And I keep finding new levels that get even better and better. And even after all these years of doing these things, and I've added in most of my food is raw now for like the past year. I'm like 99% raw. And I'm discovering lately that eating more lamb versus beef has gotten me to another level that I'm enjoying. So it just keeps coming. You just gotta play around. Gotta have an open mind and don't be afraid to experiment. And I love it. See how good you can get it. Don't just settle for being an 8. Or if you think you're a 10, question that. Are you really a 10? Can you get it better? Because I thought I was a 10 for the longest time until I found a new height and I realized, wow, I was really only at an 8 this whole time. And now I know what a 10 is, or a 10 plus even.
Absolutely. And if you're just starting out, I mean, you don't have to be convinced that the keto diet works. You just have to be curious. Are you curious? Allow yourself to be curious. Allow yourself to wonder. Just wonder.
So have you seen any of my shows at all? Any of my interviews with people?
Yeah, I did see one.
Did you see the end? Have you seen the end?
Is something bad about to happen now? What's at the end? Is there a surprise? I'm looking behind me.
There's a surprise, but it's not bad. So you don't know what's coming. That's good. All right. I'm going to take my headphones off for a second, so I won't be able to hear you, but I'm going to talk for a second. So
You've got me worried.
you said, is something bad going to happen? I have my tenets in life. We talk about the ketogenic diet, fasting, and there's meditation and breath work, and there's all these things. One of my tenets in life is to have fun and enjoy life. And I have my tagline for the show is fix yourself with fat, right? So I put on my rapper persona and I say the tagline in my own unique way like this. I say, fix yourself with fat. And what I've been doing is asking all my guests to say the tagline for us. So everyone before you has said it. And I'm putting a compilation together. And at some point, I'm going to have a video coming out of everybody doing their own fix yourself with fat. So what do you think, Shannon? Is that something you can do for us today? All right.
Just like that? Do I not get a beat? Where's my rap beat? What am I?
You got to do it yourself. It's your own unique way.
Fix yourself with fat. Fix yourself with fat. Fix yourself with fat.
That was excellent. Thank you so much. I mean, after 2 hours of talking about such serious things, I like to take us out with a laugh, get everybody to chuckle at the end.
Yeah. I love the outfit. No, I haven't seen the very end of one of your shows. I clicked off it. That's very funny. Um, yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on. And I hope that we can do it again. We have so many other topics we can cover. We don't have to do another 2 hours. We can do quicker interviews if you want. I just really enjoy talking to you. Even if we're not recording it and we're not doing a show, I would appreciate just being able to talk to you once in a while and just share our
Cool.
stories. And I really enjoy it.
There's so much in this space, and thanks for the interview. That was amazing.